but business conditions with the family business were such that it was impossible for him to do that. So
How did he graduate at 16? Was it different at that time?
no, he was smart. I was not quite 17 when I graduated, but that's because I wanted to graduate early. And so I went to summer school so that I could skip a year. So I went twice. And I had had an accident when I was a child of 10. I think I mentioned that to you.
Yeah.
And so I was held back for a period of time, one half a semester, half a year. There were A and B classes when I was a kid. The A classes started in September, and the B classes started in January, I guess, or yeah. And so when I was held back because I hadn't been in school for 6 months, how unfair is that? Anyhow, I went to summer school when I was in first year of high school so that I could advance. Anyhow, so Josie is at school. They're doing it virtually, and they're not allowing kids to go to school. And anyhow, it's different in certain areas, really depending upon the severity of the virus, I imagine.
Yeah. And the governors, the Iowa governor has really not put a lot of restrictions in place. So that's been part of it too.
It's a woman, I think, isn't it?
Yeah,
yeah. I've seen her on TV. She's quite the conservative.
Very conservative. Yeah, very aligned with the Trump agenda. So it's and it's been a interesting thing to sort of.
You heard the news. You heard the news about Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yeah.
It's very sad for the obvious reason, being such an incredible person, and now the severe danger of having somebody radically to the right as another justice. Anyhow.
It was a bummer to wake up to that news this morning. But,
I'm sure. And to fall asleep with that news on our minds. So.
Yeah.
So why don't you have your list of questions?
I do. I've got my questions here.
Yeah. All right.
So, so this is our third talk, and it is September 19th of 2020. So I thought for the first thing, we were kind of discussing things we'd like to hear from you about, and so the first thing is if you could talk about a time that you experienced some adversity or some real challenges in your life, and how you made meaning out of that. What was the process through which you integrated it and were able to move forward?
Well, when I met Granny and decided to get married, what a bad decision that was, but I survived that. Thinking about adversity, I was, some people would say blessed, I would not. Some people would say lucky. I was very lucky. I didn't have any difficult times in my life. I was, as I expressed to you before, I was terribly spoiled, and anything that I wanted, I could get. And I did, I think, sadly, as I look back, took advantage of everything that was able to come my way. I was a very, very happy child and a very lucky teenager. Had wonderful family relationships and wonderful friendships with friends from school and then colleagues as I grew. I think I mentioned to you, if not, I will again, or I will now. There were 4 other men. We were boys together. Did I mention
The boys?
boys?
The boys.
And so there were no unhappy times in my life. The most unhappy time for me was when my mother died.
Mm-hmm.
I was a mature man with a family. I don't remember ever breaking apart and being as sad as and crying without the ability to stop my tears and emotions. She was a wonderful woman. She was just really an incredible woman. And it's sad that she didn't have a chance to see her grandchildren grow and mature, as with Granny, as of course, whose mother died when just before we got married. I just lived a wonderful life. I've been spoiled by my parents, my family, my sister, your lovely Granny.
Mm-hmm.
She regrets it now, of course. And we joke about that now. She says, well, I finally woke up. No more spoiling. So now I have to do the dishes. I have to do the clothes. And I said, God, it's pretty easy stuff. I mean, why did you complain about that? Well, with 4 kids, it really wasn't so hard. It wasn't so easy. But, honestly, Ben, I'm a very happy man. I was very lucky to have parents who were loving as you have had. I, of course, don't know your parents, Ashley. Are they your parents, or where do they live?
So my dad passed away when I was 15. My mom lives in Iowa now. Yeah.
Well, my parents were, I think I even mentioned to you the fact that we had a very happy home. And our friends, my sister Leah's friends and our friends loved to come to our home. It was just a great place to be and great place to grow up. And our parents never argued. We never heard them argue anyhow.
Was it like a big living room, or what does your house look like?
Well, the first house that I recall, we moved. I was born in South Philadelphia. There was as was my sister Leah. South Street is a very active business street, and my family and my father's business was located on South Street at 10th and South Street in Philadelphia. And when you're here, I'll take you down there and show you. They're still an active business street. Not the main shopping area. You don't know Philadelphia, either of you, do you?
Not well, no.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, it's not important now. Anyhow, my parents lived at 812 South Street. On the 3rd floor above a store that the people named Cher owned, and they sold things related to sewing, threads and fabrics and those commodities. And the business was located 2 blocks away at 10th and South Street. And we then moved to Cedarhurst Street in West Philadelphia, 6023 Cedarhurst Street. And it's in the very western part of Philadelphia, southwestern part of Philadelphia. If you go one block past, you're in another county, in Delaware County. Philadelphia stretches for, I think it's 43 miles from one end to another. It's got a very, very large boundary. And it has, I think I've mentioned to you, Fairmount Park. It's the largest city park in the world. Anyhow, 6023 South, 6023 Cedarhurst Street was a small house with 6 rooms plus a little porch. The porch was approached, if you walked up, about 12 steps, a tiny patio. And I think I described the next door neighbor who owns this house, the Cohens. And my parents thought they might buy it for $1,200, but the $18 a month rent, I think, was a better deal for them at that time. So you entered the porch, and on the porch, our parents had flower pots and plants, pots, and some nice furniture. There was a little radiator, very low radiator. It probably was about 15, 16 inches high, and it ran across the breadth of the room. And then you would go to your left, and there was a living room with a stairway, the stairway up to the second level, second floor, then a small dining room and a small kitchen, and steps. I guess there were 16 steps, wooden steps, to go down to the back driveway, which we called an alley, and played in the alley. And during the Second World War, we had a victory garden growing vegetables. I remember growing vegetables in that tiny patch. I mean, it could not have been more than 8 feet by 8 feet wide, but we did have a victory garden there. And across the street from the back alley driveway were some, it was a big lot, an empty lot, which was a playground for all the kids. And then it was the main street, Baltimore Avenue, where the traffic went. The trolleys rolled into Philadelphia from there. And so that was the house. And when I was 3 years old, I mentioned it to you, I think, Leah, my sister, and I were playing on the porch, in the porch, I guess. And I fell and hit my head against the radiator. You know, the way the radiators are made, they come to a little bit of a V. And so I hit myself here. And of course, I always blamed Leah for having pushed me against that. We teased about that all the time. And fortuitously, my mother's brother, there were only 3 children, and not only, there were 3 children in my mother's family. My mother, the youngest, Uncle Joe, the middle child, and my Aunt Catherine, who lived across the street, hit 6020 Baltimore, Cedarhurst Street. So I think I mentioned to you, I thought I was a really rich kid. I had 2 houses to live in. Whenever I wanted, I was over there or at our home at 6023. So Uncle Joe came and took me to the doctor or hospital. They sewed me up with a bunch of stitches. I still have the slightest line there from the scar. But, I still tease Leah about pushing me against the radiator. Said, no, I didn't do it. You really fell. So that was that house. And it was wonderful because just 1 block down was the park, and with the creek, and the creek froze and we'd ice skate on the creek. We moved when I was 13 years old. It was after the strike. It wasn't after. It was at almost the end of World War II. We moved in early September strike that. It was in the summertime that we moved to 437 South 48th Street in West Philadelphia. A lovely home, a lovely block. A house that was considerably larger and in a very nice neighborhood at that time. It still is a very nice neighborhood. It's part of what is called University City today, as the University of Pennsylvania, which is also in West Philly, expanded and went west from where they are located at 30th Street and Spruce, in that area. It was and still is quite a lovely home area. And that's where, as a teenager, I made wonderful friends, lifetime friends. I talked to you about Du Bois, so you know about Du Bois. They were all from the hood. So that house had also 2 levels of steps, about the same height up to the main house on the living area. And you entered into a porch, a very lovely porch, quite a bit larger than the one on Cedarhurst Street. A living room, a dining room, a kitchen. Upstairs there were also 3 bedrooms. They were larger bedrooms than we had on Cedarhurst Street, and 2 bathrooms. Wow, that was luxurious. And a little den where Leah and I, she first, because she was the elder and was entitled to it, a little study where, and then when she graduated from high school, a couple of years after me, and had other study habits, she was in college, I took over that learning center. We had a back alley, and the back alley was quite wide, and our parents put up a basketball court for us, for me, and that was a lot of fun. My friends all loved that because they would come and play, and it was, as I said, Du Bois and some of our other friends would play basketball there in nice weather. So that was the house, and it was we moved in just before I was bar mitzvah. I was bar mitzvah at age 13. My birthday's July 20th, and the bar mitzvah was September the 4th in 1944. And I still remember the beginning of my Haftarah. Do you know what a Haftarah is? You know what a Torah is, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So a Haftarah is the part of the Torah that is read on that particular Sabbath day. And so it started, Ku miori kivoresh ukvod Adonai lachoi. And so it went on and on and on. I didn't understand what it meant. I could read Hebrew, but I really didn't understand Hebrew. And I never translated that portion of it. But I was happy that I had a bar mitzvah. I had a million gifts and party, and our parents had fixed up the basement of our home into a playroom. So that was an extraordinary place. And Lee and I played down there. We had friends over. We had a ping pong table. My dad and my parents entertained. They had a bar down there. It was really great. And that we had radiant heat. It was just an amazing thing to have heat emanated that way. And it was really, that's the only heat that we had down there. The house was not air conditioned. although we had air conditioners in some of the rooms.
Mm.
So that was close to West Philadelphia High School, and I started high school while living at 437 South 48th Street.
Mhm. And so you were in that, or your family was in that house for probably what, like 8 years, you think? More?
Longer than that.
Longer than that.
We lived in that house, not we, your grandparents lived in that house until after your father was born.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Your father was our first child, as you know.
Mhm.
And when the first child in the Jewish religion and tradition is born, there is a tradition of the Kohen, the chief Jew in the tribe. There's Kohans, Levites, and Israelites in the sequence of authority. The Kohans were the rabbis, the Levites were the assistants to the priests and the rabbis, and the Israelites were the population. So in the tradition of the Jews, they have a bris, where a child is circumcised, a boy is circumcised, and then the Kohen, and one of our parents' friends who were a couple, Doc and Ruth Weber, he happened to be a Kohen. And so he owned the child. The Kohans owned the children, and the parents had to buy back the child from the Kohan. So your father cost me $1. It was and the tradition was that the parents, family, and friends would gather, and this was done at 437 South 48th Street, would gather for the celebration of a firstborn being a boy. And Granny, a first mother, was upstairs with Danny, with your dad, and came down the stairway holding this beautiful child, and then handing it to Doc Weber, the Kohan, who owned your father, so to speak. And then there was some ceremonial stuff that went on. It's very fun. If you're not seriously religious, as I am not, my parents, of course, were, it's kind of fun. It was a lot of fun. And so it cost me $1, but I got them back, and that's the story that you're familiar with.
Not a bad one.
That happened at 437 South 48th Street. And then several years later, maybe 3 or 4, our parents moved to Center City, Philadelphia, to a lovely apartment complex called Parktown Apartments, and they had a beautiful apartment there.
So now, well, would you rather talk about being a young parent, or would you rather talk about the boys?
Either way.
Okay, well, we'll start with being a parent. Do you have any memories about being a young parent in the 1960s? And I think you said Granny's mother had already passed away. Isn't that right? But I think
Granny's mother died the year before we were married. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately.
But Tilly was still alive at the time, I believe.
Oh yeah.
And so, what? How were they? Were your parents active grandparents?
Very.
Very.
Very active.
Yeah.
Having a Goldstein son, as with your case, Ben, they were very excited to have a grandson that was so beautiful and healthy and strong. And they quelled, you know the word quell? They were joyous within themselves, is to quell, is a Yiddish word. And they quelled because he was a beautiful child. And as he grew, he was active and very loving and with them, as with other people, of course, but with them, they treated him like a little king and little prince, I guess. And all of our children, the four of them, knew Grandpop and Grandmom Goldstein, and they spoiled the kids as much as they could, which is good. Grandparents are supposed to do that. Also, we're strict with them if they got out of hand. I think I remember doing that with you once or twice, Ben.
Probably.
Probably, definitely. All right, so where are we? What was your basic question?
I was just wondering if you had any memories you wanted to share about being a young parent and that
Yeah,
in your life.
it was a joyous time. Granny was very young when your dad was born, and she adjusted outwardly anyhow to having become a housefrau. And of course, having a little baby, the joy of having a child was wonderful. I was working when I was working for my dad and wasn't really content. So ultimately, I opened a shoe store of my own, of our own, because Granny helped work there too. Being a young parent was a joy. We bought a home in Paoli, which is in the western suburbs of Philadelphia, where we have always lived. And we had a beautiful home. It was on an acre of land, with trees in the back and lovely neighbors. Dan was very active as a child. I mean, very, very active. And
how did the kids get along once they were all there? Because it took a few years for that to happen.
Yeah. One of the stories about your dad, I thought I had mentioned this to you. When we lived on in Paoli at that home, there was a street that wasn't active with automobile traffic because it was off the main traffic area. So a lot of people walked. And I guess when we moved there, they had started to build a church, St. Norbert's Church and School, at the very bottom of, there was a hill where our house was positioned. And at the bottom of the hill was where St. Norbert's was being built, and it was finally built. And I guess your dad was maybe 3 or 4 years old, and there were nuns who would walk from St. Norbert's up our block and around the area for exercise. And they always stopped and would play with the children or chat with the children. And So your dad was playing outside one day, and he yelled to Granny, Granny, the witches are coming. Here come the witches. and they heard them. And they heard them say it, and they laughed, and they thought it was great fun because they were in black drab looking clothing, and he referred to them as the witches at that time, which was kind of fun. And so we had a swing set outside on the back, and with kids would play there. Mindy was born not quite a year and a half after Dan was born, and she was born on the 31st of December in 1960, and was also a very beautiful child, as were all of our children. And Josh was the prettiest of all the children, I must say. He was gorgeous. And Emily was born after that. The children played a lot. Your dad took advantage of the children, the other kids, teasing them, being very gracious and kind, really. But he did a lot of teasing. And as Josh grew up, and when he was 5 years old, your dad was 12, Josh would want to play with him and wrestle with him, and Dan would take him to the point of Josh wanting to scream, and then screamed out, "Mommy, Mommy," and then Dan would let him go. And then Josh would go and cry and hug his mother, and then 2 minutes later, he was back playing with Dan because he loved it too. So our children got along quite well. As children do, they tease one another, and the girls, who were just I guess 3 years apart, had the most difficulty growing up with rivalry and jealousy, and that sort of silly kid stuff. Now, of course, they're the best of friends. They talk to each other 2 or 3 times a day, I'm sure. But they all the children have been close. We, as I said, in our home, Lee and I had great times with each other and our friends, and I believe that our children had similar relationships with each other as they matured, and with their friends, particularly the 2 separate group pairs, Danny and Mindy, and then Josh and Emily. I was away a lot, and parenting was really pretty much on Granny's shoulders because I traveled abroad and for business purposes, and but it was a pretty happy home. Our parents, granddad, mom's dad, lived in the opposite end of the Philadelphia area, and we would visit there, of course, and enjoyed his warmth, his intelligence, his caring, and of course, with my parents, when they moved to Center City, it was closer for us to visit, and so we saw them frequently, either where they were living or when they came out to see us. And then we moved to this marvelous, marvelous place up on Valley Forge Mountain. We moved there just before Josh was born. It was paradise. We lived on 5.9 acres of land in a home that was originally built in 1732 as what was called a Father, Son, Holy Ghost home, where it had a first floor, a second floor, and an attic, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And then it expanded quite a bit, and it was used as a farm originally, and ultimately in the I guess the last part of the 19th century, it became the Pickering Hunt Club house. It was a horse club, the Pickering Hunt, where they have a fox and foxes, and the hounds would chase the foxes. So it was that, and when it was the Pickering Hunt clubhouse, they added, as they did in those days, to revolutionary homes, additions. So it became a long, narrow house as they added the additions. Because of the terrain, they added the additions that way. And two of the rooms were prefabs that were sold by Sears Roebuck Company. So what was the den originally at the home at Sporting Hill Farms was a prefab. And although we had a fireplace there, it was very cold in the wintertime. So we would bundle against each other on the furniture and have a fire blazing, a beautiful fireplace. And on the other end of the house was another room that was also a Sears prefab, which became an extra room, a guest room, and finally it was Mindy's bedroom with a bath as well. But beautiful grounds. We renovated the house, had a new wood shingled roof put on, and it did so much. We renovated the Sears fireplace room with a very magnificent library-like room with lots of space, and a playroom that was marvelous, and a wet bar there as well. And I guess Josh was 4 or 5 years old, so he was still at home. If he wasn't in kindergarten, I think kindergarten was not all day. And so he was there seeing that and playing with the men who were building the place, and having lots of fun there. And that turned out and we had a tennis court and a swimming pool, so it was really quite nice. And I thought I had told you about the Pickering Hunt Club.
I mean, I think I've heard about it, but I don't think we've covered it on.
Well, when we were building our swimming pool on one side of the house, there was a big meadow there, and I guess it was 70, 80 yards wide. And when they were building the pool, one day I was out for whatever reason, speaking to the builder, and all of a sudden the group of horses came riding through very close to the pool. So what's going on here? Well, it was the Pickering Hunt. They were riding through, and which they had customarily done.
Yeah.
And so, wow, this is not going to be good. They're going to trample our children to death. So I called the Pickering Hunt, and I told them, look, we'll build a little fence, and outside of the fence, you can ride all you want. And they rarely did. But inside the fence, it's a no-go, because we don't want you killing our kids. And so there was this area where they could ride. I think once or twice they rode through, but I don't remember them doing it any more than that. That was a funny thing. So then after the Pickering Hunt sold the house, it was owned by, I think, 2 other owners before us. And it was a lovely, lovely house. I mean, we just had so much joy there. It was a great party house, a great house for the children to play in. With the 6 acres that we had, our neighbors also had land. So about 5 neighbors had probably 35, 40 acres of land, and our kids would play with the neighborhood kids. The dogs would go out and play with the kids, and Granny would sometimes, we had a triangle that she would ring so that it was dinner time and the kids would come in and have dinner and do their schoolwork and that sort of thing. The kids would stay out at night and camp out sometimes with the neighbors' kids. And I mean, it was a paradise, absolutely a paradise.
Was the dog Stardust? Is that right?
Stardust was your dad's first dog, yeah, a golden. Incidentally, Josh and Laura and the kids just got a puppy, a golden. They were out here last Sunday or the Sunday before because Josh was taping and photographing with his camera, a movie camera, an interview with Granny and me about our recollections of Sarah. She was also, we got close to her, very close to her, because when she went to school in the East, we saw her. When she was in Virginia, which was close enough so that we could visit, and she would visit us on long weekends when the trip would have been too long to fly back to Colorado. And then, of course, when she came to the University of Pennsylvania to do her graduate work, she was here for 6 years, more or less, and we really became very, very close to her. So, and got to know each other. And interestingly, as you probably have experienced to a degree, or if not, you will, certainly when you become grandparents, that grandkids become friends. And, there is that parents are the enemy and the grandparents are the saviors. And well, as Sarah was quite mature and lovely, we just became really good friends with her. And it was so lucky for us to have her close by and becoming as close and well acquainted with us as had occurred. So that was a very special thing for us. So Josh was out here doing the filming of what we had, which is going to be really nice, I think.
Oh, that's great. I'll be excited to see how that turns out for the wedding, I take it.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So maybe well, yeah, we have a couple other things I'd like to ask you about while we're on the topic of like kind of.
Well, let me get back to the house because something interesting happened there.
Oh, please, yeah.
Did I speak to you about the experience we had with the rabbi in Spain? Let me just go back a little bit. Okay, yeah. When we lived there, your dad passed his 13th birthday, which is the age of which Jewish boys become bar mitzvah, and in these days, Jewish girls become bat mitzvah. And your dad wanted to be bar mitzvah, but when we lived in Spain, there was no rabbi for him to teach the bar mitzvah stuff. So when we got back home, Granny wanted to join a Jewish community synagogue center of learning, and we did join because a friend of ours, the wife of one of the boys, had joined this synagogue with a community of 25 families maybe, and they didn't have a synagogue or a center, so they rented a church and had their Sabbath services at that church when the church, of course, was able to give them or rent them however it worked. that space. And so with your dad wanting to be bar mitzvah, and having joined that Jewish community, there was a young man who was not yet ordained as a rabbi, but was hired as the rabbi. And Dan was his first bar mitzvah boy. And I remember him as being a very charming and nice young fellow. And he was wonderful with Dan in that regard. So he said to Dan, because of our experience of having lived in Spain, and the history of the Jews in Spain is quite renowned in the golden years, as they are called, the 700 to 800 years where the Moors ruled and the Jews were very important as doctors and lawyers and bankers. They were treated extremely well by the Moorish royalty and neighbors. There's quite a history. So this young man suggested to your dad that instead of a typical Baruch Atah Adonai religious ceremony, reading from the Torah, although I think he did learn something about Torah reading or memorizing, I'm not sure which. He said that because of it, if you have a chance to research the history of the Jews, would be a nice way to commemorate your bar mitzvah, your growing into manhood. And so we went back to Spain, not having lived there as a family, because the education, Granny and I thought would be better for them to come back to West Town School, which we did. But the children would come back to Spain periodically in summertime, vacation time. So came back, and at the time there was one rabbi in Spain, one synagogue in Spain. It was in Madrid, and the rabbi was trying to pull his name up. Granny? I don't know where. Garson, yes, Rabbi Garson. So I went to visit Rabbi Garson and told him that our son wanted to be bar mitzvah, and the young rabbi had recommended that he do a study of the history of the Jews to whatever degree it could be studied in a short time in Spain. And the rabbi said, have your son correspond with me, which he did. Do you have a time problem?
No, we're good.
Okay. Because I don't want to just ramble on if you have something to do. So he said, have your son write to me, which Dan did. And Rabbi Garson was just so kind and generous with his time. So we came back to, after Dan had agreed that he would correspond with him, and did through letters. We went back for a trip, and Rabbi Garson recommended we go to the areas of Spain where Judaism flourished. And so it was in Madrid, Toledo, Seville, Cordoba, and those areas in middle to southern Spain. So we had our home, of course, over there, because I was still doing business in Spain. And for several years after that, even while Dan was in college, I think. And so they came over, all of us, the four of us, and we traveled in our auto and went to Toledo, Madrid, Toledo, those points of interest. And it was extraordinary. It was really a learning process for particularly Dan, but for all of us. And it was thrilling to have history there that we could learn about and experience. And then we came back home, and Dan had his bar mitzvah. We had it at our home, that wonderful home at Sporting Hill Farm. I guess we had 40 or 50 guests, and your dad told the tale of the history of the Jews at the recommendation of Rabbi Garçon and this young man whose parents came because Dan was his first bar mitzvah boy, and the parents were kvelling, means filled with joy and smiles that their son was doing this with his first bar mitzvah boy. So that was quite a wonderful experience, unique, I would say, without question, and we all learned a lot. So it was a great trip in that regard as well.
Oh, that's great. So one of the things that we were curious about is if there were any foods or things that you had in that you associate with the family, or like recipes. I don't know, maybe Granny might have some thoughts on this as well. I don't know.
Yeah, you ought to interview her, of course. Well, Granny was a good cook, made a lot of delicious dishes. And of course, our children had varying appetites. Your father cleaned a plate faster than anybody I've ever seen, maybe except for Granny. The two of them raced through their food. And there was never we never had to wash a dish that your father ate from. It was always perfectly clean. We used to tease Granny and Dan about that because they ate quickly and nothing was ever left on the plate. You know what a great appetite your dad has, right?
I'm familiar.
And none of the others were really great eaters. Josh, of course, was the worst. Not quite as bad as I was, but he was, of the four children, he was the worst because I was a terrible eater and never liked much about food. But Granny was a terrific cook, and she strived to satisfy, but I don't think the three other kids were ever really happy with eating.
Well, maybe we can pick her brain about some recipes sometime.
Yes, I'm sure she made prakas. Prakas is a dish of cabbage filled with meat, and it's a Russian, Eastern European dish that Aunt Lee's, my sister Leah's husband's mother, was Russian, came from Russia, and she was a marvelous cook. Her prakas were a prize to have, and she taught Granny how to make prakas and how to bake apple pies. There are probably some other dishes, but they were the two standouts. And Nanny Unger, Aunt Lee's husband's, Aunt Lee's married name is Unger, was an extraordinary cook and a lovely woman, as was Vic's father.
That's great.
Poppy Unger.
Well, we'll follow up with Granny about that, and then one thing we were curious about for you is what books or literature or music that has been impactful for you in your life. Am I wrong in thinking that you were a Steinbeck fan?
Well, I read Steinbeck, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Well, as a child, as a child, Jack O'Brien was an author who wrote about dogs and the Mounties in Canada. And as Granny just reminded me, Howard Fast was a particularly wonderful author whose books I read. And I think that Freedom Road was one of the most impactful books I had ever read, and a book called The American. But Freedom Road.
Yeah, you gave me a copy of that.
Did I really? Well, I'm glad I did.
Like 15 years ago.
Yeah, it was, and I still remember a lot of that book. That was really had an impact on me, and I grew up with friends who were Negroes, Black friends. Did I tell you about the Williams brothers?
I don't believe so.
Basketball players who went to summer camp with me.
I don't think so.
They were workers in the kitchen, and I was the privileged kid who went to camp that my parents paid for. Hardy and Jimmy Williams were two very exceptional basketball players. Hardy particularly. Both of them were in my grade, and I went all through school with them. They and another Black girl whose name escapes me were the three people I knew and was friendly with as a child growing up. Well, Hardy and Jimmy were my age. Well, Jimmy was a year older, but when he was a kid, he had some illness and was held back a year. So those two brothers were in the same class. And so the three of us grew up together and played together, just did a lot of stuff, socialized. And when I guess we were 15, well, they were a year older because I was held back, if you recall, and accelerated. I guess when we were 14, I was 14, and they were 15. We were talking about what they were going to do in summertime. And I said, well, we need jobs. We're not going to job. And I was going to summer camp, and I was going to be a waiter at the camp I had gone to for many years as a child. Not that I was a grown-up at 14, but I was more of a teenager than a child. And so, although my parents had to pay for me to be a waiter, I don't think the same rate that a camper would, but nevertheless, they had to pay for the right for me to work but I enjoyed all of the camping stuff, sports and entertainment and so forth. So Hardy and Jimmy didn't know what they were going to do that summer. They said, we've got to get a job. We've got to get jobs. And so I said, look, I know the owners of the camp where I've gone to since I was a young child. And one of them is Harry Litwack. Harry Litwack was a basketball coach at Temple University. And Ben Weinstein was a basketball coach at Germantown High School. And Huey Black was the basketball coach at Yaton High School, and Upper Darby High School is what it was. And so I approached Uncle Harry, and I said, I've got these two friends. They're basketball players. Said, yeah, I've heard of those two guys. And they were just starting high school, and Hardy and Jimmy made the first team as freshmen in high school. I guess we were juniors. At freshmen, we went to a junior high school, the 9th grade. So we were in 10th grade. And so he said, yeah, well, I think we could use them as dishwashers. And why don't you, I'll talk to Smokey. Smokey was the chef, a Black guy who I knew was wonderful, kind, gentle, happy guy. And so Harry Litwack said he would talk to him and have Jimmy and Hardy reach out to Smokey, which they did, and they worked there that summer. And I think Hardy worked there until he started college, and I think Jimmy worked there while he was in college. So they had really great jobs, which they loved, and they had the Pocono Mountains to enjoy during the summertime, played basketball in their free time with all the campers and the waiters and the counselors, and became good friends. So after Granny and I were married, and after your dad was born, we had this house in Paoli, which was lovely, I described earlier. And I still maintained a friendship with, particularly with Hardy, who had become a lawyer. He ultimately became a state senator, and as did and is his son, Anthony Williams. So Granny and I had Hardy and his wife over for dinner. I think it was just your dad, probably. Yeah, I'm sure we had only one child. They had one child. So they came over for dinner. We had a delightful time, and I would interact. We would have lunch together in the city, Hardy and I, and we interacted quite a bit. And so one day he said to me, I ran across Rex Alexander, who was in our high school class. I said, yeah, what's up with Rex? He said, well, he's the same old Rex. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, so what are you doing? You ever see any of the guys from high school? He said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I was just over to Sammy Goldstein's house. He and his wife had us over. We had a delightful time and blah, blah, blah. And so Rex said, what? You went over to that Whitey's house? So Hardy said, yeah, of course. We've been pals since we were kids. We even went to summer camp together. Said, what? You went to summer camp with Sammy Goldstein? Oh, yeah, we played. We had a lot of fun. Of course, he didn't tell them that they were the dishwashers and I was the privileged kid whose parents had to pay for me to have the job. So it was that kind of, we laughed about that all of the time. I remember the 50th anniversary reunion, I guess, of our high school graduating class. We laughed like hell about that because Rex was there, and we teased him about it.
Oh, that's great. So I was curious, taking a turn towards more like dates and people. So we talked about David Goldstein and Morris Goldstein, so your father and grandfather, and I think the name changed to Goldstein before Morris, right? From Guldbrüder.
Gulabruder.
Yeah.
Gulabruder.
Gulabruder. Yeah. Was that so? Morris was born as Goldstein. All right.
No, Morris was born as a Gulabruder.
He was born.
Yeah. What happened, as I understand it, he had an elder brother named Benjamin who moved, and you're not named after him. That's just coincidental. He moved to London with his family. And we unfortunately don't have any contact with that family because they stayed in the UK, wherever they lived, London, I suppose. But my grandpa, Morris Goldstein, was the second son. And I think there were 5 children. I think there were 3 girls and 2 boys. And so when my grandparents, Morris and Rose, Moshe and Ruchel Goldstein, Gulabruder, went to, when they came to the States, they were destined to come to the States. They wanted to come here, but they went first to England and visited with Morris's elder brother, Benjamin, and who wanted him to stay there with them, but my grandfather and grandmother wanted to come here. And so when Benjamin Gulabruder moved to the UK, he changed his name to anglicize it.
Mm-hmm.
So I had said to my father, why didn't he change it to Smith or Jones? But anyhow, they changed it to Goldstein. So that's how the Goldstein name came to be.
And so Benjamin and Morris both have the same Goldstein name.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes. And the girls married, and so their Gulliver names became the names of,
Right.
yeah, Monroe was one of them, and what was the doctor's last name? I've forgotten some of the. I have it written down somewhere. What my grandfather's sisters' names.
Hmm. And we don't know his father's name, Morris's father's name?
I don't know what it is. No, I have no idea.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then on the other side, your maternal line, so Tilly's father was Nathan, right?
Nathan Sandberg.
Sandberg. And then Samuel Sandberg was his father, who you're named after?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
And I don't know when they emigrated to the United States. I don't have any background on that. And if you'll remind me, Ben, and I'm making a note now to contact cousins of mine whose last name is Ticker, Ticker.
Mhm.
There are two brothers, Neil and I'm trying to think of Neil's brother's name. I can't for the moment. One lives in Texas, one lives in California. Neil, I think, lives in California.
Right.
And I have contact with them barely, but I can contact them and find out if they have any knowledge about the Sandberg origins, at least as far back as they can or may know about.
Yeah.
But the Ticker family comes from Nathan Sandberg's sister, whose name was Pauline.
Mm-hmm.
Same as Granny's name, not related, however.
Mm-hmm.
Pauline was Granny's real grandmother, paternal grandmother's name.
Mm-hmm.
That's how Granny got her name. But my Aunt Paulie was married to a man named Max Ticker, and they had two sons and a daughter, Max Ticker and Sammy Ticker. And I can't think of the daughter's name for the moment, but I can picture her very well. So that's that. That the Sandberg thing is a mystery to me, and I should find out about that for you and for myself.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so then your father was in the Coast Guard, right?
He was in the Coast Guard Reserve.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, because he was too old. They would not draft men. He was past 36, which was the age limit when they would take recruits. And so he wanted to do something that was helpful and patriotic, so that and also Granny's father was a Coast Guard reservist, coincidentally. They didn't know each other, but we found out about that as we got to know about each other's families after Granny and I were married, or maybe even before that. Yeah, and so he guarded the docks in Philadelphia all the way down into Chester, Pennsylvania area, where they have oil refineries and still had then and still have big refineries. Arco is, Sunoco is the brand name, and they're still active and busy and polluting the world. So that was a very important factor because fuel was so important as it is today. During wartime, with an attack, it would be disastrous to lose that source of power. So that's what Grandpa Goldstein did all along the Delaware River. So he would leave after dinner, go on duty all night, come back, have breakfast, and go to work.
I have his pea coat from when he was in the Coast Guard.
You still have it?
Yeah, I actually repaired it and it's in Colorado.
Yeah. Imagine that, because it goes back to 1940s,
Yeah,
early 40s.
yeah, it's
And
a very
so
nice coat. I would like
he
to.
wore it, I wore it, your dad wore it, I think Mindy wore it. It's incredible, you know. And it looked like new when last time I saw it.
It's in good shape. There's only, I think it still has a little bit more to do on it. It was a bit of a fixer upper when I got it.
That's wonderful. I didn't recall that. That's great.
Mhm.
Little piece of Goldstein history.
Yeah, you can still see his name written on the tag on the inside.
Oh, really?
Yeah, David. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I
it's
didn't
in
recall.
my closet in Colorado. I'll have to get that out. Check it out. Then the only other thing that I have for as prepared was if you wanted to say anything more about the Wankharts and how they're connected in the whole matrix of things.
Sure. The Wankharts are part of my maternal grandmother's family. She was a Wankhart, Fanny Wankhart. Um, did I not discuss with you the history that, as I know it, of their having come from somewhere in the Pale to
Yeah, you did mention that. Yes.
they moved, she and her family, of course. She had a sister and three brothers. Uh, they came to Prague, and I think probably in the maybe before she was born, even 1880s, 1870s, because in those little shtetls, like in uh, what was the play? What's the play, dear Paul?
I'm not listening to it.
Tevye is Fiddler on the Roof. Did you ever see that?
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, shtetl, probably somewhat like that. Bigger or smaller, but that was the type of small community. So Jews were being ousted in many cases, in most of those cases, for no reason other than hating Jews and wanting the land that they had. So Prague was an open city in those years. I know that my grandmother was born in that area, and when they moved to Prague, because it was an open city accepting Jews, welcoming them, the Wankhart family moved there. And then when Prague became quite anti-Semitic because of the royalty or the leading government, whatever it was at that time, the family then moved to Vienna because Vienna was an open city accepting Jews and having Jewish life flourish up until the time of Hitler, as we know, and you know the modern history. And so there was my grandmother, Fanny, probably Frances was her name, however it was pronounced in Yiddish. Fruma, I think, is the Yiddish for Frances, and Fanny was her nickname. So she came to the United States in 1899 or 1900. She came as a young 16-year-old because the family was, fairly well-to-do, and the family made lace, handmade lace. They had factory or whatever the structure was. And so her best friend, Rosie, I forget Rosie's maiden name, but Rosie married a man named Herman Frank, and she came to the United States and lived in the United States. So as best friends, they corresponded, and Rosie invited Fanny Wankhart to come visit, which she did. And when she landed in Philadelphia, she was greeted by her friend, Rosie Frank, and Herman Frank, and Herman Frank's best friend, Nathan Sandberg. Nathan is your father's middle name, as I think you know, named after my namesake's son, Samuel Sandberg, Nathan Sandberg. And and she never returned to Europe. She married my very sweet, kind, gentle grandfather, Samuel, Nathan Sandberg. And they lived in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. You've heard of Swarthmore College?
Mm-hmm.
Very fine, small, originally Quaker school. Bryn Mawr, where Granny went to college, Haverford, where your father went to college, and Swarthmore, which has a college where my mother grew up. All three Quaker fine schools. And my grandfather, Nathan, had a Ford agency. And automobile agencies had sold gasoline, because there weren't the substantial number of gasoline stations as we know it today. And so obviously an automobile agency would sell gasoline. So they had this agency in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. They went broke in 1929 when the Great Depression hit. I needed an office at one point in the early to mid 80s. And I had a partner in that particular business opportunity. And so I found an office that was halfway, equidistance from my home and from his home. And Swarthmore was the center point. So we figured that would be a great spot. So I went to Swarthmore to look for a place to rent. And I found over a carpet store, the Paulson's carpet store, a sign saying office for rent. Did I tell you the story?
I don't recall.
No? An interesting story. And so I went into the store and I said, "Excuse me, I'd like to speak to the owner." I see the sign saying, "Oh, I'm one of the owners. I'm one of the brothers. I'm Mike Paulson. What do you want?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to take a look at that office." So he said, "Sure." Took me upstairs, and the office was really adequate for what we were, even more than adequate. So I looked out the window and I saw across the street the building that I knew was the original building of my grandfather's Ford agency. It was then, in the early to mid 80s, a co-op, and it still is the co-op. And I looked at the window and I said to Mike Paulson, he and I became friends, although he was considerably older than me. I said, "Mr. Paulson, I would take this office even if I didn't like it." Looked at me strangely. He said, "Why?" I said, "Well, first of all, I like it and I would like to rent it. But my mother grew up in Swarthmore and her father owned a Ford agency." And he said, "Really? That's interesting." And he said, "Where was it?" I said, "It was right across the street where the co-op is located." And he said, "That's interesting. Which one was your mother, Catherine or Tilly?" He knew my mother. And he and I became really good friends.
Mm.
It was just such a funny coincidence. So that was a wonderful, wonderful part of my history and experience. So,
Cool.
yeah.
Well, I have exhausted the questions that I had prepared. You have anything? No? Well,
This is fun for me, Ben and Ashley. I'm really
Yes.
enjoying it. And getting a chance to see you this way is also a great pleasure. So really,
Likewise.
Paula, Granny, she may have gone out. I don't know. I thought you'd say hi to her.
yeah, we'd love to. I mean, if obviously she's not there, it's okay. But
Yeah, I think she probably went out.
but
All right, kids. Well, let's do it again.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Get more questions prepared, and
Yeah.
I'm enjoying going through this history lesson of mine, and it's really enjoyable. You both look great. I'm so happy for you, and thrilled that we'll get to see you one of these days when you're back here in the States. Yeah,
Love that.
Yeah, hopefully all the
and
flights start going again.
and you're united with your boy. Yeah.
And if you have any like documents or things you want to share with us, you can always just send me an email on or I don't know, however you want to deal with it.
I'm trying to gather stuff, Ben. You're not the only one who would like to have it, of our grandchildren. But you're welcome to whatever I can gather together from an family historic standpoint. I'd love you to have it because I think we have first of all, an extraordinary family. And I hope that will go on for many generations. And I think it's important, from my point of view, for you to get to know your cousins even better than you do now.
Yeah, we actually just had a call with Miles a few days ago. It was really nice. We haven't chatted in years. It was really interesting. Now he's in college and
he's the second part of his junior year, and he's doing it now because he was I guess he told you he was in Argentina.
Yeah. He
When
luckily got out right before it shut down. That
just
was
just by
extraordinary.
the skin of his teeth, and so he didn't go back because of the virus, so he's repeating that. He is a wonderful, bright, and interesting young man.
Mhm.
Really, I hope that you guys remain friends and can become even closer as the years go on. We do have an extraordinary family, talented in many ways, and I think kind, which is a very important part of family life, to enjoy each other and be kind to one another. It's marvelous. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Poppy. This was a really good experience, and we'll think about some new areas to question you on and drill into some things.
As much as you can. Getting me to recall is a lot of fun for me, and I hope it will be interesting and educational for you. So,
And
all right, kids.
we'll rope Granny in one of these days as well.
Oh, yes, she'd love it, I'm sure. All right, kids, have a great day.
Yeah.
I'll see you soon.
Yes, you
Lots of love.
Love you.
Right, bye-bye.